Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we are changing the mental health narrative, bringing hope and solutions. Here's your host, Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist.
Dr. Meshanette Johnson-Sims has 20 years of experience supporting vulnerable populations, namely children and adults who have endured trauma, severe mental illness, and/or exploitation. She is an administrator, international psychology researcher, and licensed psychotherapist in the state of California. Most proudly, she is a wife and mother of 5 children. She believes that providing culturally appropriate and trauma-informed clinical treatment, crisis intervention, and aftercare support services is both critically necessary and gratifying work. Her current responsibilities include senior behavioral health leadership within local government. She has oversight of the Transitional Aged Youth and Child Full Service Partnership Program, the Juvenile and Adult Forensic Mental Health Services, the Crisis Continuum of Services, and she chairs Napa County's Suicide Prevention Council. She's also an adjunct professor who teaches courses such as Counseling Theories and Techniques and Introduction to Public Child Welfare at Napa Valley College. Well, welcome. It's delightful to have you join us here today, and thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. Appreciate it.
I was hoping you could start us off by telling us a little bit about how you got into the work you're doing and what drives your passion for it.
I've been at this work about 20 years now. What got me into it, it's interesting. I'm one of those people who, when asked that question earlier on in my career, was hard pressed for an answer that I felt like other people would be okay with. I've since been grounded in it, that I've always been the person that people have come to with whatever concerns they had. In elementary school, I'd be with my friends doing cartwheels, and they'd tell me about their parents' divorce or what was going on in their lives. Be sitting on a bus stop, and someone would just start talking to me. So I almost felt compelled to go into the work, because it was almost like people are going to be sent to you. So what are you going to do when they encounter you? How are you going to help them? And so I've gone into the work, got my master's and my Ph.D. But it was all coming from a place of wanting to help people and to make sure that when I encounter people that are hurting, that I can help them.
And so you got the master's and the PhD in what specialty?
So my master's is I'm a marriage and family therapist. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and my PhD specifically is in international psychology with an emphasis in trauma services. So the way that came about was I was working in a partial hospitalization program for adolescents, and came across a client that really helped open my eyes beyond my local community. She was adopted by a fairly wealthy family, and who was on a missions trip, and really came to befriend her mom. And her mom had a terminal illness and passed. And when this family learned of what happened to her mom, they decided to take in this child who was my adolescent client. She was in psychiatric in a partial hospitalization program because she was self-harming and had real preoccupation with wanting to die. And what it boiled down to was that she was feeling remorse for having left her siblings in in Africa where she was from. And so she was living a very good life. She was in a prestigious school. She was cared for well, and she just didn't know how her siblings were doing. And it reminded me of all of the people who want to help, who are trying to help, but may not see things in context and how helping can hurt as well. And I mean, they love this girl. The family definitely did. And by no means am I faulting them, but just wanting to know more about the context and how to help people in context and that is culturally appropriate for what they're going through. And so in my specific program, I traveled in two different locations, one in the Philippines, one in Ghana, so that I could learn in context what help looks like. And so wanting to make sure that I was more versed on that as far as my career is concerned.
And you mentioned a specialty in working with trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk more about trauma and what your specific interest in it is?
Working with people, just people. I feel like we're oftentimes looking at people without considering that they may be presenting with more than what they're actually sharing at the time they encounter a helping professional. And so what I'm interested in is looking at trauma-focused care and being knowledgeable about what it means to survive not just a trauma, but multiple traumas and complex trauma. So basically looking at the experiences and how they compound to really shape people's perspective or the barriers that they encounter to healing. And so, for instance, a lot of my work from the beginning, I one of my first jobs in the field was working as a child abuse investigator and working with families and on who had been in very difficult circumstances, whether there was abuse or substance abuse, physical abuse, exploitation, um, all of those scenarios that really impacted the children and the families that I was serving. But I would be investigating one piece of it, and it didn't really tell the whole story of what the child had gone through, and because I was already looking for a traumatic experience and how they were surviving it and trying to pull strengths out of their story to help them utilize that to overcome their difficulties, it was easy for me to learn of other traumas they experience. But then when I was in private practice and I was just encountering someone, maybe they had struggled getting over the fact that they aborted a child earlier on in their life, and they were struggling to move past it or accept what they've done. So wherever they came from, that was one specific trauma, but that was not indicative of their whole experience. And there were sometimes other traumas that made their experience of what they were currently going through even more difficult for them to hold, because it was almost the straw that we're looking at, the straw that breaks the camel's back, and not really seeing the wealth of information and experiences that really make healing a little harder for some.
Well, as you're talking, I'm thinking about, watching this field over the last, it'll be 49 years in June that I've been doing therapy in one form or another. And how it used to be, let's just talk about, they would look at people basically like straw people or clay,
Mhm.
and they would just look at what symptoms are coming out of the person and give a diagnosis based on the symptoms. No credence given to context or culture or trauma and it's so delightful over the years I've been in the field to see the development of a much more complex and interrelated system of looking at people. For instance, The Deepest Well by Nadine Burke-Harris, this book that talks about the importance of ACEs and adverse childhood events and how these days there are more and more people who will talk about trauma informed, but very few people actually build their approach to dealing with people in a way that's open enough to incorporate, was there trauma? What kind? Would I have considered that a trauma? No, but this person felt it's the most important thing in their lives. And how does that fit in their culture? And did their family accept it as a trauma or consider them weak because they couldn't move right past it? So all of these things, when you pull them together and you're learning to deal with a person and help him or her recognize the strengths they had to have to survive and build that up while acknowledging there might still be trauma resolution work to be done. But at the same time, helping them understand that the fact that they're still breathing and functioning at all is a testimony to their strength and their resources. So it's delightful to find more and more people as I interview like you who have an awareness of, it's a growing awareness of how to integrate this into your clinical work.
Oh, it's foundational. And as you said, just to witness it, I think there's such a, I don't think that it is really acknowledged and celebrated in the field as it should, what it means to really just simply witness someone's experience and witness how they've managed to survive. And it's a big deal, I think, for people to talk about traumas, their expectation of what a trauma is measured by their own personal or cultural experience. But in fact, the trauma as it relates to the individual is what matters. It's what dictates whether or not it was a traumatic event. I don't get to say that that's not a traumatic event and you shouldn't respond that way. And sometimes cultures do say, well, you should have been strong enough to handle that because you're from our culture and this is what we expect you to be able to handle. That is our strength. Our strength is being able, we're survivors. And so then they're not allowed to have the experience that they're actually having. And that's important.
Yeah. And clinically for me, when I'm working with people, it's far more important for me to help them communicate to me, not so much the event, but what they meant, what they made it mean. And so it's this constellation of energies and beliefs about themselves and the physical, the mental, the emotional energies that they download as they go through an event. And that's what we call trauma later on. It's this set of, the wonderful way for me of defining it is here's an event, doesn't matter what the event is, here's a person living their life. And as they go through this event, if they decide to change some of the fundamental beliefs, or they feel like they've been forced to change or question some of their fundamental beliefs about themselves, their safety in the world, the nature of the world as a threat or safety, if that changes after this event, we call this event a traumatic event. And this event might be, I like to use the example of the Oreo cookie trauma, right? We had Johnny and Jimmy, identical twins, 5 years old, from a good family. They come home from their kindergarten and Johnny, the thing about Johnny is he knows his mother always tells the truth. Now, remember, these are identical twins. Jimmy never really paid any attention to that too much, but Johnny thinks about it all day, every day. My mother always tells the truth. Comes in, sees a plate of Oreo cookies on the table, yells out, "Hey, Mom, can we have an Oreo cookie?" Mom says, "Guys, you know the routine. Go upstairs, undo your backpacks, wash your hands, put your homework out, and then come back down. You can have a cookie." Like I said, they're a good family. They dutifully go up the stairs. They do that thing. They come back down. They're 3 steps from the bottom. Johnny looks over and sees an empty plate of cookies because the preteen and teen cyclone came through and ate all the cookies. Johnny, his life is now never the same. My mother lied to me. Jimmy never really focused on that. Doesn't skip a beat. Hey, Mom, they ate the cookies. Can I have a banana? Or Johnny's life may never be the same because of what he made that mean.
What he made it mean.
Regardless of Mom's, I'll go get to the, I'll go to the store. I'll get you one. It'll be all right. Have a banana with Jimmy. It's what Johnny makes it mean in that moment. And so I might have gone through things in my life that nobody in my family thinks was traumatic.
Yeah.
And yet, when that stuff gets resonated today, it can drive my behavior as an adult.
And it can have rippling effects through your family and what it means to feel like you're supported by the people that matter most to you. And so, yeah, it is definitely foundational as far as the work I do to focus on what is trauma and how it drives meaning making for the individual and what it means for their healing.
Well, and what I like about that definition and that approach is it helps the clinician validate for the individual what perhaps no one else in their life would validate as being significant and life-altering and or traumatic. Because it isn't the event so much as what the person downloads energetically and emotionally.
Yeah, the experience of it in and of itself.
So you talked about working for the county. What's the largest trouble area or the specific clinical focus for you in working with the county?
It's important. It's important work in county mental health, but specifically what a lot of people are not aware of is that the mental health that is provided through the county is considered or called specialty mental health. And so these are people who are moderate to severe for the most part, and who are really not managing daily living tasks, who are feeling like they're just not able to cope without more acute intervention, maybe multiple times a week, as opposed to an every 2 week or every week outpatient, sometimes needing a little bit more support, whether that's with individual therapy or case management, or oftentimes find themselves being assessed for an inpatient stay. So in the county, I'm working with predominantly that population. However, there's community response that serves the entire county in our mobile response unit. So they're going out, deploying, partnering with the police sometimes, and other times in lieu of the police, so that families can see someone outside of a law enforcement uniform that is responding to the home to see whether or not they can de-escalate right then and there and keep them at what we call the lowest level of care, or whether or not it needs a 5150 or 5585 evaluation that allows them to get further assessment for a hold. And so that is the community response, where you don't necessarily have to be a client, but you are in need as a community member, or you are brought in because you have experienced acute needs, moderate to severe, or experience of trauma that we get involved in, that is a little higher care than an outpatient provider in the community, or sometimes at your medical provider level.
So in the county you serve, what would you call the top, say, two or three issues that people are struggling with?
I would say that severe depression and isolation. I would also say that with some suicidal ideation, and also substance abuse. And um, that is really predominantly what I'm seeing is, especially since COVID, people have been used to isolating a little bit more, and that's been helpful for some, but for others, not so much. And coming out of it, some people are not comfortable with coming out of it in a way that other people have celebrated. Coming out, socializing more, integrating more, feeling like they can be apart. There's more talk of mental health issues since the pandemic began, and so people are okay to some extent talking about it, but really the help and reaching out for help, I'm not seeing a lot of it, and so it's really making sure there's outreach, trying to get the word out about 988 and being able to talk and text to the suicide hotline so that people, even upon the thought of it, or if they tend to kind of perseverate on the thought of dying, that they begin to feel comfortable with texting, talking about it, and then they link them to help and a local provider. So that is what we've been trying to get the message out about, and making sure that we find new avenues to reach people, so that they can feel like help is actually available to them.
And so is there a particular popular intervention or template for addressing suicidal ideation that you have found that gets implemented in your county?
Not specifically a template of sorts, but what I'm trying to do is make sure that we utilize a means to make sure that we're reaching what we call populations that are most impacted, and that is our older population, also our teens, and as well, we're making sure that our LGBTQ population is actually getting the message and feels comfortable with accessing resources as well. We're trying to train people on how to identify the signs through QPR, question, persuade, refer. And our goal is to make sure that the whole community knows how to question, ask the questions, how to make sure that they understand how to be available, how to link people to care, and also that there are resources between not just the county, but other community partners that can provide support to these communities so that they can have access to care.
It sounds your QPR sounds like the emotional CPR. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, what is it called? Emotional CPR or
Yeah.
psychological safety,
There's
911 or
a
something, yeah.
well, there was a program that they
Oh,
developed, and it's basically similar to what we did back when I was in graduate school. They used to call it a peer counseling program, and we would
mm,
go into the community colleges and just get students who were interested in sociology or psychology to take a class and just learn how to listen and
mm,
identify a certain, few hot button topics, and then be able to make a referral if needed. And so it's like boots on the ground,
yeah,
educated and tuned into uh, the signs that somebody might be struggling or trying to hide a struggle.
Right.
And it really helps the licensed professionals get access to those people sooner.
Yes. I mean, that is exactly what we're hoping to do, is to make sure that not just licensed folks or professionals have the keys, but that your peer group, because oftentimes adolescents are going to their peers first. So I mean, we're not going to stop that trend. So we might as well educate
And use
everyone
it, right?
and use it, right? Exactly. They're going to go to them first. And they may not have the tools to help them address their unhelpful thinking, their, the what has brought them to the point in their lives where they're considering, you know, suicide, but they can definitely be a resource that can say, I can handle you telling me, and I'll make sure to hold your hand on the way to getting help. And that's really the message.
Well, and you can find the emotional CPR at emotionalcpr.org. And I interviewed one of the founders, and they created this, and they go out and they train people in different countries, and it's quite a nice little, it's based on good listening. It's training people on being present, being aware of their own internal response, and listening well, and it's quite useful. There's not a specific, silver bullet to wipe out suicidal ideation or intent, and we are witnessing a lot more people who are struggling through the isolation of the pandemic.
Yes.
The difficulty with our screens, that we're constantly staring at screens, and people are getting isolated in various ways without good social skills training. Are there any patterns you're seeing or movements in therapeutic tools that you are finding of value that you share with people on a regular basis?
I believe that in talking with people, it's important to make sure that we're bringing to light their tendencies to, whether it's exaggerate the situation, confusing what is a high and low probability of events, focusing on um, the most harmful outcomes. Also, when people tend to consider over personalize the situation, making it that, not being able to see that there's other possibilities or explanations for what they're going through that doesn't involve self-blame. Also, jumping to conclusions without having all of the facts, that, not relying on their own assumptions of what is kind of getting them down, but really getting all the facts, and looking for exceptions to their situations, just kind of feeling like, well, it's always been this way, it's always going to be this way. I only have experiences with this, and really having the opportunity to say, okay, but when was that not the case? And looking for the exception, looking for, it's definitely okay, to have thoughts of sadness, and even sitting with that sadness for a bit, and making meaning from it, but to also remember the positive, to also include and make sure not to exclude, like, the good attributes and experiences that they've experienced, to make sure that there's room to hold both. And so really being, as a mental health professional, going in and making sure that those areas in which we can bring to light what's happening for them, to validate the true sadness and sometimes unfortunate experiences, but also to make sure that other aspects are brought to light, and have their kind of day in the sun to really say, well, these are exceptions to that. And this is how well you handled the situation. This is what is possible now because of what you've endured, and to really give space for that. So I feel like one is the hugest barrier is getting the individual to the care. And then, I mean, that's the biggest thing. And then once they're there, challenging these unhelpful thoughts, and making space for other feelings, other experiences, that can really add to the life they're wanting for themselves.
Being able to get them to see more than just the tunnel vision of negativity that they've fallen down.
And I think the community even having a space where just a realization that anyone can find themselves in this space that needs support, and normalizing that has been a lot of work, but it's definitely needed. And I think, if anything, to think, for the experience that we've come out of the pandemic, with, is the normalization that we all need to mind our mental health, and to make space to encourage others to do the same.
It's great that you're mentioning that. We have people that, like the 1 Million Lives program, that this engineering company with thousands and thousands of employees woke up and realized, hey, mental health is a really important part of our people being able to remain highly functional.
Yes.
And they developed this little check-in you can do. I think there's a 7-minute one and a 15-minute one. And they used to use it just for their people in their company. And then they said, well, what about our vendors? And well, what about them and their families? And next thing they said, well, wait a minute, we've got this thing, it's online and it's not costing us anything. Why don't we just leave it open? So it's for free. And anybody can go on there, put your name in, answer a series of questions, and get a status check on how are you doing in your social life health, your physical life health, your diet life health, your exercise life health, your depression life health, what in a very, and the recommendation is do this every week. Do it a couple times a week if you want, if you're starting to feel down. So you can figure out, oh, look, here's a little quick check-in. Here's where I'm falling down. Here's where I'm succeeding. Here's where I might tweak this a little, and get people to wake up to what they might do personally to improve that mood. Or they get to the point where they realize, hey, you know what? I'm down in 3 or 5 areas. Maybe I should ask for help.
Right. Yes. I love that. I love that. And I've been seeing more apps for people for mindfulness, and taking a moment to consider how they want their day to go, and taking going through breathing exercises to help ground them. This is, I mean, I'm happy to see this, more and more of it, because it is not it's not just something that you do when there's an ailment, or the symptoms have really shown you that you need some attention to it, but really something that we can do, just like exercise, to manage ongoing, our mental health and overall well-being. And I know there's campaigns like There Is No Health Without Mental Health, and just really grabbing hold of the fact that we do have supports at our fingertips even, and like the one you mentioned, to help us to maintain our well-being, our mental
and do a
health.
status check so that people can go to OML, 1 Million Lives, oml.world, WORLD. And another one that's got some nice free resources is the samehereglobal.org, samehereglobal.org, all one word. And they've got a little thing that they use in the schools that it just is kind of a check-in. Am I thriving or am I sliding? And it lets people give a very simple language for a check-in to communicate instead of just saying, "Oh, hi, how are you? I'm fine."
I'm
Well,
fine.
where are you on this scale, right? I'm kind of thriving, I'm exceeding, I'm excelling, I'm sliding,
Yeah.
I'm stuck. Well,
Giving them words for it. I love
yeah,
that.
and a simple way to communicate with friends and family about it, so you don't have to struggle to come up with the words. How would I
Mhm.
say how I'm feeling today? I'm feeling
Yeah.
kind of off. Some people easily talk about that. Others, it
Yeah.
feels like a strange language.
But in using the same language, I mean, it gives a language to talk about these things, and one normalizes it and also lets everyone know, okay, that's very different from where you were 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And so there's enough information there that says, okay, then let's pay attention to this even more so.
Well, let me just ask you to take a breath and scan
Mhm.
what we've talked about and
Mhm.
think, is there something you want to go back and highlight that we've already talked about, or something I haven't even asked you yet that you want to put out there as part of what you do?
No, I can't think of anything.
That's fine. I just want to make sure that if there was something
Okay.
burning there, that we had a chance for you to say it before we wrap up. We greatly appreciate the work you're doing with people in the county out there, and your willingness to share with us. So thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure meeting you. And
Yes, it's a
I
pleasure
look
to be
forward
here.
to hearing if you have any big updates to share. We've talked about how you might have some
Yeah.
changes coming up in your
Yeah.
life.
Yes, I will fill you in.
All right. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Tim. Take care.
Dr. Meshanette Johnson-Sims has 20 years of experience supporting vulnerable populations, namely children and adults who have endured trauma, severe mental illness, and/or exploitation. She is an administrator, international psychology researcher, and licensed psychotherapist in the state of California. Most proudly, she is a wife and mother of 5 children. She believes that providing culturally appropriate and trauma-informed clinical treatment, crisis intervention, and aftercare support services is both critically necessary and gratifying work. Her current responsibilities include senior behavioral health leadership within local government. She has oversight of the Transitional Aged Youth and Child Full Service Partnership Program, the Juvenile and Adult Forensic Mental Health Services, the Crisis Continuum of Services, and she chairs Napa County's Suicide Prevention Council. She's also an adjunct professor who teaches courses such as Counseling Theories and Techniques and Introduction to Public Child Welfare at Napa Valley College. On her road to her current position, her passion has grown from her decades of experience in specialty mental health services for SED and SMI populations. Just over 9 years of experience has been in mental health management, 7 years of training clinical practitioners, 3 years of private practice, and 13 years of public service work. With a targeted focus, she has dedicated her education and career to providing support to people at vulnerable times, as well as people who are part of vulnerable and marginalized populations. Promoting and ensuring equality and access to mental health wellness is a value she embodies and elevates.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.